My name's Larry Krieger. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a teacher at the FSU Law School. And I'm hoping that the talk that we have today turns out to be useful for you. I try to make it really practical. And the principles that I like to work with are quite universal, so they should relate not only to your professional life, but also to your personal life, your relationships, how you deal with your kids, everything else. So hopefully it'll be useful for you. My particular area of interest is I have two. One is the professionalism problem, if you believe there's a problem, which I do, among lawyers. And the second is the wellness problem, if you believe there's a problem among lawyers, and I also do. I think it also extends to judges. But my background before I was a lawyer was scientific, loosely speaking, but that's where all my studies were. And what I've come to understand that I'll try to present here is that these issues of lawyer professionalism, lawyer well-being or depression, anxiety, values, excessive commercialism, alcoholism, or other addictions, that they're all really one issue. They're all related inextricably as one issue. And I think that the science will help us see that. So let's go to the next slide, if we can. When we talk about professionalism, the first question becomes, what is a professional? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on that here. My approach to it is pretty straightforward. Nobody's told me I'm wrong yet, so I'm going to stay with this until corrected. I've listed here the qualities that I think imbue a person with professionalism. And you all can see them. I won't read them all. But basically, other than the last one, which is technical competency in a person's chosen area, they all are universal principles that relate to people. Caring about others, being unselfish, having integrity, being compassionate, having a sense of wisdom, broad perspective, good judgment, all that. And no one really seems to have objected to this listing of professional qualities in all these years I've been talking about it. The point I want to make here is that really doesn't this relate to everyone, whether they're professional or not? Isn't this the way you would want to be with your children? Take a look at the qualities again. Isn't this the way you would treat a good friend? Isn't this the way a clerk at the mall who's really helpful would treat you? So, and I think the answer is yes. And I think that helps us because a lot of times there's this big mystique about professionalism and we need to do these deep studies and get lectured about it and all that. To me, a professional is basically a well-motivated, mature person who's decent and has technical skills. And so let's go to the next slide. That's my quick initial take on professionalism. We're going to come back to that as it relates to well-being. Looking at this next slide, the lawyer distress slide, this is a study that was done on about 2,000 or 3,000 lawyers in Washington State several years ago, and it shows pretty much what I suspected, having been a litigator for 11 years and then teaching in law school for a good while after that, that lawyers really do have very elevated levels of distress of all kinds. This study used the brief symptom inventory, which is a screening inventory for people that need professional help or don't. And just to take a quick look at it, in this right-hand column where you see lawyers above the 98th percentile, and then all those numbers, basically those numbers are in a normal population would be 2%, 2.3%. And you can see in the lawyer population the numbers are 5, 10, even 15 times greater than we would expect in a normal population. This cutoff, the 98th percentile, is basically 2 standard deviations beyond the norm on each of these scales, which means in psychologist terms that this percentage of people are clinically ill, according to this screen, and are, quote, in need of immediate professional assistance. That's the way this study defines 2 standard deviations beyond the norm. The study was done by 3 psychologists. So if you think back to the last slide, we don't need to go there, but if you think back to all those exalted qualities of wisdom and compassion and caring about others and broad-mindedness and being helpful and being self-secure and having integrity, all those things, and then look at this slide, the one we're on, it should be totally obvious. People who are feeling like this don't act like that. They just don't. I mean, these people are having a bad day nearly every day, you know, and it can be up to 35% of our lawyer population. And I have to say that this does not surprise me at all based on my 11 years in litigation. I know all of you have practiced law, so draw your own conclusions about your own experience or what you saw in your partners, associates, adversaries, the judges, and just the general population. But this didn't shock me at all when I saw it. What shocked me was that it was documented in a reliable way, because that really got me going. Let's go ahead to the next slide. That really got me going in this work. I'd been teaching about this, but when I saw that, it gave me confidence to really press ahead. One of my things, because I teach in law schools, is that I see that people change in law school. And my belief in a lot of things that I write about is that some of these problems do start in law school. Some of those psychological problems for lawyers. But for now, it's enough just to say, here's a study of the law student population at a major law school about 15 years ago. Dr. Ken Sheldon and I have done recent work that we published at 2 different law schools, which confirms this. So we can say our lawyer and law student population has psychological issues. And I think that's really all we need to, that we don't need to go any further than that. What we want to spend most of our time on, how do we avoid being on that right-hand column, on that lawyer distress list, or if we're there, how do we get out of it? So let's go to the next slide. Part of what I started to study will be laid out in these next few slides. What are the sources of well-being? What we've seen is that lawyers and law students don't have them. Whatever they are, something's missing from the lawyer and law student population. And if your experience is different, if you've always been happy and delighted every day in your practice, and everybody you see around you practicing law is just having a great time and having a wonderful life, then I'm happy, and please write me, and, you know, we'll talk. I'd like to hear that. But bottom line is, I thought what we needed to look at is, where does well-being come from, since it really seems like lawyers are missing out on it. And it turns out that there's a modern branch of psychology called positive psychology that has studied this in the last roughly 25 years. Rather than studying what's wrong with you and what made you crazy, they study the sources of thriving and strengths and wellness in human beings. So I got hold of a good researcher in positive psychology. Self-determination theory is the branch that he works in. And he educated me on this, and then we started doing research on law schools. But in the midst of being educated on it, I began to draw parallels between these studies and the lawyers I knew and my own experience as a distressed lawyer. I make no bones about that. And so what we're going to look at here, somewhat in brief, is the established sources of well-being for people. And then what I want you to be thinking about, because it's also a talk about professionalism and the overlaps and intersections, as we look at each of these sources of well-being, think about how they relate to professional and unprofessional behavior, because it's my belief, and the article I think that y'all are presented is that when these sources of well-being are attended to, then professional behavior results. And when they're ignored, unprofessional behavior is more likely to result. So we'll go through them. The first area to look at is what you see on the slide here, the universal human needs. And actually the gent that I do research with is the principal author of this study. This was a huge study back in 2000 that was conducted in the United States and South Korea with multiple samples over multiple time periods over a year or longer to determine what are the human needs, not just what are American needs or somebody else's needs. And this was the result. What you see here are the needs. The first one is called the autonomy need. I call it autonomy authenticity because part of the definition of autonomy, which you see in parentheses after each need, is actually the definition of it. And it's how it's tested in these surveys, includes a sense of authenticity that I'm true to what I believe. I'm true to who I am. I tell the truth. What I say is what I mean. In other words, I have integrity. Autonomy and integrity very, very similar, and they definitely involve a quality of authenticity, genuineness of the person. I think, and I'm making a big deal about that because I think that is the number one thing that happens to law students in law school and happens to lawyers as we do our legal analysis, is there's no encouragement to remain authentic because our personality has nothing to do with the facts and the law. And so I think that's something that we need to pay attention to. So that's one need. Second need is pretty much self-explanatory, relatedness to others. People need to feel closely connected with a number of important others in order to thrive. And let me just say, if you look at the top of this slide, under that Roman numeral, universal human needs, the definition of a need is laid out there. A need is an experience that produces a sense of well-being, thriving, and meaning in life. So that's what we're working with. And since lawyers often lack well-being and emotionally aren't thriving and may feel like they don't have much meaning in their lives, this is the first slide about sources of well-being because some of this is missing. So autonomy, relatedness, competence, self-explanatory, a sense of feeling capable to do what one needs to do. And then self-esteem is a fourth, a kind of a subsidiary need in this structure, but it's also extremely strongly related to well-being. And in fact, self-esteem and autonomy and relatedness are the three that are the strongest. So those are the three strongest human needs. Now, as I go through this again, I again want to encourage you, think about your professional life or think about your personal life. Because the research is if you're taking care of these four needs, your life is going pretty well. On a psychological level, doesn't mean you didn't have a flat tire or you didn't lose a job or somebody didn't get sick. Doesn't mean that. It's still human life. But what it means is you have a sense of well-being and thriving and meaning and purpose in your life. So, and if the answer is no, if you look at this short listing of four items, you'll probably see one or two that are very weak in your life. And you can make a choice to change that by changing your behavior. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this next slide shows the other primary established sources of well-being in human beings that have been established through research over the last 25 years or so. There are two major components here. One is motivation, and the other is a person's values or overarching goals. Let's take motivation first. And to contrast them, motivation, they're related, but motivation more or less is why you choose to do something, and values more or less is what you choose to do. So there's a why and a what for your behavior. Motivation, the why, this one is the easiest. There are only two good reasons to choose to do something according to psychological research. So the list is short and it's pretty straightforward. The first reason that will produce a sense of well-being and thriving, energy, positive mood, is that you actually like doing it. It's pretty obvious and straightforward, but it's something that lawyers forget. How much does it pay? How good do I look? Will I win? You know, will that help me with my next job? All those things are totally irrelevant to intrinsic internal motivation, which primarily is, do I like the work? If you don't like the work, there's no way you're going to be happy if you're doing it 40 hours a week or 70 hours or 80 hours a week like some lawyers. Okay, it just can't be done. So, but with all our intelligence and our analytical ability, we tend to overlook the obvious. So it's nice to know this is research. If you ignore this, you will suffer. That's what the research says. So choose work that you enjoy. And the second good reason psychologically for doing something is that you think it matters. It basically supports your value system, the things that you think are most important for your life. So the ideal behavior is one that fulfills both of these. It's not always easy to find work like that. Nobody said it would be easy, but ideally you would enjoy your work at least most of the time, just the doing of it, and you would feel like it makes a difference, that it matters, you're actually serving some purpose within your value system. If you don't have those to some substantial degree, you won't enjoy your work and you're likely to actually resent it. Okay, again, as we're going through this, because there's not going to be a test at the end of this talk, is be thinking about, do I like my work? Does it matter? Within my value system, do I think I'm doing something that's worth doing? And if the answer to either of those is no, then reconsider what you're doing. Doesn't mean you have to quit and just go out on the street and all that, but use some common sense. But it's our choices that either fulfill or neglect these needs and values and motivations. Purely a matter of choice for most people. All right, and the third area is values. The things we hold most dear, that we think are most important about our life. And here there are basically four positive, constructive values that have been identified in modern psychology, that when people endorse and act on these values, they experience, again, a sense of well-being, meaning, positive energy, positive mood, and thriving in their life. Right? And those values are a sort of a self-value, a value of self-improvement, self-understanding, self-acceptance. You could call it a growth value. And then the altruistic value, helping others, serving, doing something for others. What's called the intimacy value, which is basically the same as the relatedness need, that we feel closely connected to a number of other people, and that when we value that. If we don't value it, we're not going to do it. So, and then the fourth one is related really to the last two, which is community value, which means valuing being part of community, building community, being in community with others. These are the values that science has identified as producing well-being and thriving. And there are no other values that consistently do that. that we found. So we want to look in contrast at the things, all the things that people value and all the things that motivate them that science has studied that don't produce wellness, thriving, energy, and a positive mood. And you see them listed there on the bottom of the screen. And these probably look pretty familiar to most of us. Money, things, power, fame, winning, pleasing other people, impressing other people, having prestige, being at the top, and, you know, anxiety and guilt, of course. But those have all been studied in all these studies. There are always options, and there are options in the studies that we do with law students too. And people that endorse these things as being important to them consistently are less happy and less satisfied with their lives than people that endorse these things at the top of the page. Improving oneself, helping others, being with others that matter, building community, doing work that accomplishes things they believe are important. So this is really important to think about, because this is the trap. This is the trap we're all in. We live in America. And the bottom half of the page here, what we could call the dark side, this is the American dream. Money, power, and fame. This is the American dream. Those who achieve it because they wanted to achieve it are reliably unhappy, according to the science. Now, if you achieve it as a byproduct of doing work that you enjoy and that you think is important, or if you achieve it as a byproduct of helping others and building community, then it's icing on the cake. Because then it's not your values. So really the difference here is, the point is, none of these things on the bottom of the page are bad. I always say, you know, if the dean calls me to his office, which happened recently, I'm happy to say, and tells me I'm getting a raise, it does not make me unhappy. It does not take away my sense of well-being and thriving. And the reason is that that's not why I have the job. You know, I have the job to pay the bills, but we're probably all paying the bills. Beyond that, the research is more money is not going to make you happy. And as I already said, that's the trap, because what law students and many of us in the legal profession and other professions, same thing is happening in medicine. And I talked to the folks over at the med school at FSU, and actually we're working on things together, saying, wow, it's the same over here. Because it's the American dream. I want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever. It's not going to make you happy. Unless you love being a doctor or a lawyer, unless you love the work you do and you're doing something that matters, that relates to these intrinsic values. So, and even to dramatize this further, one of my favorite psychology papers is the first big major paper that established these intrinsic and extrinsic values, these adaptive and maladaptive values as scientific realities, is called The Dark Side of the American Dream. And here it is, you see it on the screen. The American dream is at the bottom of the screen. And that's the dark side in terms of your wellness. So it doesn't mean try not to make money or try not to be popular. No, it doesn't mean that. But it means if those are the reasons that you make your choices, then your choices are not going to serve you. The reasons you make your choices need to be from the top of the page and from the previous slide to fulfill those needs for a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence and relatedness. All right, let's go to the next slide. So, summarizing here these three principles, let's take the last two first because we spent more time on them. The last two, that there's an emphasis in these sources of well-being on personal and interpersonal attention. and on the process of what you're doing, not whether you win or lose, not how much money you make, but the process, what you're doing and why you're doing it, when you're doing it. And there's also an emphasis on integrity, autonomy, authenticity, a sense of a real person in there that you know and that you like, that you esteem. And by contrast, the next item, there's a de-emphasis on outcomes, on material gain, and on things. So bottom line, it's life from a psychological point of view, which is a concern considering where we started with all that lawyer dysfunction and distress. It's about people, yourself and other people. It's not about what you have, what you get, and what you make. And it's certainly not about comparing yourself with others. One of the things that I didn't emphasize that I'm going to, and I'm going to ask us to flip back just quickly to chart number 3, lawyer distress. This is a very interesting thing. You'll notice that the highest level of distress out of all these things, and depression is high, and anxiety is sky high, obsessive compulsive is high among lawyers, but look at interpersonal sensitivity. More than 1/3 of the lawyers are clinically ill on this scale, more than 1/3. And the definition of interpersonal sensitivity, according to these authors, Beck, Sales, and Benjamin, is the need to compare favorably with other people. Okay. The need to compare favorably with other people. It's all about how do I look, how much am I getting paid compared to how much you're getting paid. Did I win or did you beat me or did I beat you? That's all about interpersonal sensitivity. That's an emotional illness that's recognized in psychology. It's something that we almost cultivate and promote in the legal profession and in law schools. Competition, who's better, top 10%, win, lose. And so there's a big trap here, and we need to be aware of that and just stay on the personal and interpersonal values. Okay, coming back to slide number 7 again, the 3 starred items. You see the first item there, the established sources of well-being also promote professionalism. That's the inevitable intersection. If you think back, and I think you all have paper handouts as well, you can page back to the human needs, which is about 2 pages back, and the values and motivations 1 page back, and think about, well, if I put my attention on these human needs, being competent, being well connected in a satisfying way to other people, having a good sense of myself, having integrity, being true to my values, being honest, are you going to be professional? Yes. And if you're not professional, what you'll find is those needs aren't being met either. You're probably lacking integrity. You're probably not proud of the work you do. You're probably not doing your best. You're probably not getting along with other people. And so the bottom line is, if you're thriving as a person, you're not only going to feel good, but you're going to do good. There's no disjunct here. It can't be disjoint. Same thing with values. If you value improving yourself, those intrinsic values, if you value building and supporting communities, if you value helping others, you're going to spontaneously act in a professional way. And if you value making money, looking good, winning, and being the best, it's going to lead you to violate your conscience and probably the ethics code repeatedly, because the end justifies the means. Okay? So I would just encourage you as a take-home, if you do have handouts here, to go home and once a week look at those 2 pages, the human needs, and it may even be on 1 page in your handout, the human needs and the intrinsic values and motivations. If your life is going well, you'll be able to see why by looking at that list, and it'll reinforce it for you. Good, I'm paying attention to my family. Good, I'm taking care of myself. Good, I'm working to be better. good. You know, I donated some service to my community this week. All those things are going to make you feel good, and they're also going to make you an ideal professional. And so just taking a look at that for 5 minutes once a week will remind you in a scientific way where your life could be stronger. Okay, let's skip 3 slides ahead to 4 actually, to number 10. The positive cycle. It's kind of summarized here. And what I want you to look at here is pretty much what I've been saying. The first part of the talk is at the bottom of the page there. Human needs, satisfaction, intrinsic motivations, and values. They support each other. And then they, in turn, support professional behavior and personal well-being as you come up to the middle of the page. And then at the top, you can see that personal well-being also generates professional behavior. When you're feeling good, you're less likely to cheat, lie, and aggravate everybody and be a jerk. And professional behavior, conversely, promotes a sense of well-being, because when you act as a professional, you feel good about yourself, your self-esteem goes up, people appreciate you more, your relatedness goes up, your sense of competence goes up because you're part of a professional community. And the whole thing feeds on itself. The important point, I think, here about this entire chart, and I've already alluded to it, is if you look at the very bottom, it talks about choices. Each of our choices determine whether these human needs are satisfied. And each of our choices determine whether we're acting on constructive or destructive values and for constructive or destructive reasons. You've got 2 very short pages of what those constructive and destructive reasons and values and needs are. So what I would just say is review it and make your choices on a weekly and daily basis to favor them. You get to have a nice life if you want to, in other words. It's really a matter of choice. Okay, next slide. And this is the last thing I want to talk about. These next 2 pages, for those of you that have paper, but the first slide, problem solvers. This is a recent study. If you think all this doesn't work, then take a look at this recent study, because this is how it works indeed. And if you think this is going to affect my bottom line, because if I'm a nice person and I have values and I want to help others, I won't make as much money, just take a look at this study. This study is published in the Family Court Review. This same author has done similar studies that are published in the Harvard Journal of Dispute Resolution and some other leading journals. So this is confirmed research also. And what it shows in a nutshell, for most of the work that litigators do, which is settling cases, people who have these intrinsic values, intrinsic motivations, and are getting their needs met are far, far, far more effective than people who aren't. Okay? And if you can see here on the first page, what the researcher did is she went ahead and she studied, I think, several hundred, so a large number of negotiations. I think this was done in the Richmond, Virginia bar or somewhere near there. And then she had, after these negotiations, she had the lawyers rate their adversary, their opponent, for about 50 personal characteristics. That's all she did. And then she had them rate the other lawyer on a 1 to 10 scale, were they effective or not. And then for people that got, I think, an 8, 9, or 10, she considers that effective. If they got a 1, 2, 3, she considered that ineffective, and if they got a 4 through 7, they were considered average, something like that. Okay, so that's where these effective, ineffective ratings come from. And then she correlated the personal qualities, like you'll see some of them here: honest, friendly, helpful, whatever it is, with different negotiation styles and strategies, whether people were problem solvers or, as we'll get to in a minute on the next page, adversarials, whether they were competitive or looking for mutual gain and trying to be cooperative. And what was found was that these cooperative folks were rated 72% effective and only 1% ineffective. So about 25% were average. Okay? And as you can see down at the bottom of the slide, I've sort of transposed these qualities that people were found to have in this problem solver category. I've correlated those with what we've already talked about, needs and values. And what I think they show is that these people have high integrity, high authenticity, high self-esteem, high relatedness, and basically intrinsic cooperative interpersonal values. They're friendly, they're honest, they're forthright, they're sincere. All of the qualities that are expressed by those needs and values. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. By contrast, the people that were in it for themselves and were not trustworthy, were aggressive, you couldn't get along with them, represented basically lower integrity, lower relatedness capacity, lower valuing of community within the legal profession and getting along with others, and were more competitive, were rated only 2.5% effective. The cooperatives were 75% effective. The competitives were 2.5% effective, and vice versa. The cooperatives, if you recall, were only 1% ineffective. The competitives were rated 75% of them were ineffective. Bottom three ratings by their opposing lawyers. So if you think that it's going to hurt your bottom line to be happy and be a good person and get your needs met and have good values, then you need to think again. And again, this shows the dark side of the American dream. If we think we understand the dream of being a lawyer, that I will kick your butt, and I'm the toughest dude on the block, and just don't get into court with me, you know, and I will win no matter what, then you're probably suffering. And if you're not, your partners are with that attitude. So that's my take on the intersection of well-being and professionalism, and if we have some questions, we can take them. Okay, end of story.